Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Just days ago, the Constitutional Court delivered a unanimous verdict, 8-0, removing President Yoon Suk-yeol from power. The ruling has not only triggered an early presidential election, but also left a gaping void in Seoul's diplomatic leadership at a time of global uncertainty and geopolitical rivalry. For months, summit diplomacy has been paralyzed under emergency rule. Now, key alliances with the United States and Japan are under scrutiny, while relations with China and Russia remain deeply fractured. The international community is closely monitoring how Seoul navigates this leadership vacuum and what comes next for its role on a world stage. Tonight, we speak to two experts to unpack the implications of this unprecedented moment. Joining us from Cambridge is Dr. Nielsen Wright, head of the Japan and Korea's program at the Center for Geopolitics. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And also joining us is Hannah Kim, assistant professor at Seogang University's GSIS. Great to see you, Professor Kim.
Thanks for having me again.
So let's start our discussion with Dr. Nielsen Wright. So, like I've said, with the removal of former President Yoon Suk-yeol from office, South Korea has entered an early presidential election phase. As an international expert, I want to ask, how do you view the impeachment and the resulting diplomatic vacuum in South Korea?
Well, as you mentioned, this was a unanimous decision, 8-0 by the Constitutional Court. I think that's a very important institutional reaffirmation of the importance of the rule of law. The court was very clear in setting out in exacting detail why now former President Yoon had acted unconstitutionally, that his claims in supporting martial law that he was justified were not, in fact, justified. I think it was a very sensible ruling and has done a great deal, I think, to reassure opinion both in Korea and abroad that the institutional guardrails, if you like, of Korean democracy are working as they are expected to do. It was also, I think, testament, of course, to the Korean people that they came out in such large numbers to defend the National Assembly on that fateful night of December 3rd, when then President Yoon made his surprising announcement. And we shouldn't forget, of course, how close it was. President Yoon might have succeeded in introducing martial law and shutting down the National Assembly, and we would be in a very, therefore, different situation if that hadn't happened. And I think it's therefore very important to emphasize that. I think it's also important to acknowledge the mature statements coming from Korean politicians on both sides of the aisle. We've heard from the Speaker of the National Assembly calling for unity, hailing this as a victory for democracy for all Koreans, for neither one side of the political divide or the other. And that, I think, has been echoed as well by statements from the leader of the PPP, the Conservative Party, apologizing for what had happened, which I think was a sensible statement on the part of their leader. But it remains to be seen whether, in fact, there will be room to really bring the two sides together. And in the 60 days that have now been established for this national election campaign, we are going to see that, if you like, that internal political division between the two sides exposed. And it will be, I think, for us to judge as we see the election unfold, how well both politicians on the right and the left manage that process and how the public responds. It is, I think, troubling that there is a sizable section of the South Korean domestic public, some 20%, who were fiercely opposed to the Constitutional Court's decision and who believe that then President Yoon acted appropriately. And I think that's an important issue to consider. On this question of the vacuum, the decision-making vacuum that you highlighted, I pick up a different mood. I was actually in the region recently. I was in Japan, and speaking to both academics and civil servants, many of them were quick to point out just how much continuity there has been. And we had just a few weeks ago a meeting of the foreign ministers of China, Japan, and South Korea in Tokyo. And I think that's testament to the effectiveness of the bureaucratic process. Acting President Han, for example, shortly after the impeachment decision, decided not to accept the resignation offers from senior ministers of the government. That was a wise move, and I think it's indicative of this commitment to keeping the government functioning. And that's been there throughout this difficult political process. So I am actually encouraged, and I think we will see, hopefully, a continuation of stable government, both at home and in terms of South Korea's foreign policy.
Right. So viewers from South Korea, not only South Korea, but also international viewers, would be closely watching how the situation unfolds in the next few months. Now to Professor Kim. Since the declaration of martial law in December last year, South Korea has been unable to, engage in a summit diplomacy at the presidential level. What do you see as the most urgent diplomatic and security issues that need to be addressed?
Okay, so I do think that, because of everything that has happened the past few months, and with an acting president and the acting president changing several times, things have remained relatively frozen under the acting president system. And now today, things are a lot more politically stable than they were last week, but still there are a lot of urgent diplomatic and security issues. Two that really come to mind right now. The first one is reciprocal tariffs. Trump announced that South Korea is subject to a 25% tariff on exports to the US. I think there was some confusion about whether the actual percentage was 26% or 25%, but now it's actually officially 25%. And these measures are set to take effect on April 9th. So this is a very significant shift from the cooperative framework established by the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement. And so it is very important right now for South Korea to restart trade dialogue. Acting President Han Duck-soo has called for negotiations regarding this, but again, because of so much domestic instability we've seen the past few months, this was kind of put on hold and it was not a priority. Another issue is the sensitive country risk. So in January, the US Department of Energy added South Korea to its sensitive and other designated countries list, the SCL, and it was ranked relatively lower, but it was still placed there because of the political instability that we saw in South Korea over the past few months. And, in many ways now we are seeing South Korea's democratic resilience, but there's a lot to catch up on, especially in regards to not just relations with the US, but a lot of other political and security issues.
Right. So, though there had been, discussions in, officials level, there had been, leadership vacancy, but these issues like Trump's tariff proposal and sensitive list, we had to, go through this. So more discussions would be definitely necessary. Now, the impeachment of President Yoon has put U.S.-South Korea diplomacy in a similar situation to 8 years ago during the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, how has the situation evolved compared to back then? And also, the U.S. State Department has said it's willing to work with acting President Han Duck-soo and the Korean government. What kind of response do you believe is necessary from our part?
Well, I think, there are two critical issues. As Professor Kim pointed out, this question of tariffs is really so critically important, not just for South Korea, but of course for lots of other countries. We cannot, I think, overstate the dramatic nature of the Trump administration in terms of its willingness to depart from all the norms that previously underscored US-ROK relations. We have seen statements when it comes to security cooperation between the US and South Korea from Secretary of State Rubio and others, and Joseph Yoon, the acting US ambassador in South Korea, stressing the fact that the relationship continues to be solid, that the alliance relationship is as strong as ever. But President Trump has demonstrated his kind of mercurial character. There's been a lot of speculation about the possibility that he might be minded at some point to try and do a deal with North Korea. And also, of course, his view of alliances and who counts as friends is a real departure from previous administrations. So I think closer ties with the United States will remain important. I think any leader, and of course there's a big question mark who's likely to be the front runner when it comes to the election in 60 days' time. The leader of the Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, of course, has often been seen as somewhat a departure from the approach of the Yoon administration when it comes to emphasizing alliance ties. I think that's partly exaggerated. I think we will see a more pragmatic approach on the part of President Lee if he's elected in 60 days' time, as seems likely given the polls. But for now, I think the importance is finding a way to work with the United States, not only because so much of South Korea's trade depends on a close relationship with the United States, but also because of the security threats, threat from North Korea, and of course the wider concerns about vulnerability in the face of America changing its approach to its alliance relationships, much more transactional and much more conditional than was once the case.
Right. So dialogue and negotiations with the United States would be very crucial and urgent at this point. Now, former President Yoon emphasized value-based diplomacy and pursued a foreign policy that's centered on the U.S. And Japan and South Korea. The U.S. media is now highlighting the possibility of a potential shift in South Korea's diplomatic direction under the next administration. What's your take on this?
Well, I think there's a danger that we exaggerate too much the gap between, or the difference between the way candidates perform in elections and the way they behave once they become elected. Senior advisors close to, for example, Lee Jae-myung, have said both on the record and in a variety of contexts that the next president, if it is Lee Jae-myung, is likely to be very pragmatic. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that South Korea has very few options, given its relatively middle-ranking size. However, it has to be said that when it comes to values, the world has changed dramatically. We are seeing the Trump administration depart from all the norms and values that were at the center point of American foreign policy for most of the Cold War. We're seeing that both in terms of domestic policy, the sort of pressure that has been brought to bear on political opponents at home, the stifling of dissent, the closing down of the Voice of America, for example, the departure from real important established norms. And therefore, at this juncture, with Korean democracy having shown itself to have been pretty resilient in the face of former President Yoon's grab for power, there is an argument for saying that South Korea should be doing more in the values-based arena and working with other like-minded countries. And for that requires, I think, much more diplomatic flexibility and consideration of other partnerships, whether it's with Japan, another liberal democracy, of course, in the region, or Australia, or with European partners. South Korea and the United Kingdom, where I'm speaking to you today, is a country that has a very strong relationship with South Korea, a new strategic partnership that was the product of the Yoon administration. And I suppose it's worth our while remembering just what was achieved under Yoon's foreign policy. There was much, I think, to admire about his approach to foreign policy, notwithstanding his failings at home when it came to domestic politics. Those sorts of strategic partnerships become much more important, and especially when it comes to emphasizing the importance of open societies, the rule of law, the importance of institutional guarantees of the rule of law at home. Countries like South Korea, Lee Jae-myung has hailed it as a victory, this decision by the court as a victory for K-democracy, can use that success as a way of going out internationally and forming stronger partnerships with other like-minded countries.
Right, so we would definitely see a lot of changes if the administration changes. Now, given this, former President Yoon has pushed for improved Korea-Japan relations through trilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. And Tokyo is also closely monitoring the impact of President Yoon's impeachment on bilateral relations. After the ruling, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba emphasized the importance of cooperation with Korea regardless of which administration takes office. Do you foresee any changes in South Korea's diplomatic approach towards Japan, Professor Kim?
There might be, as you mentioned, former President Yoon did push for trilateral cooperation between the US, South Korea, and Japan. And we really saw this come to light during the Camp David summit that took place in 2023. Interestingly, all of the leaders that participated in the Camp David summit are now no longer in office. But at the same time, Prime Minister Ishiba has continuously emphasized that maintaining cooperation, regardless of which administration is in power in Korea, is necessary. Now, similarly, acting President Han Duck-seo has consistently emphasized the importance of robust trilateral relations. But at the same time, we have seen that President Trump has taken a much more transactional approach in terms of the relationship relationship between the US, South Korea, and Japan. And we're also quite unsure as to what the next administration will be doing in terms of its approach to these relations. A full reversal is very unlikely. A new administration may be more cautious. It may be have a more balanced approach. There may be some renewed sensitivity towards historical issues, but at the same time, there are shared concerns related to North Korea. And so trilateral relations with the US and Japan, along with South Korea, is going to remain continuously important.
It would definitely be important, but we'll have to see how each interests would unfold. Now, on the other hand, some people suggest that since the U.S. values trilateral cooperation with South Korea and Japan to check on China, it would not welcome any instability in Seoul-Tokyo relations. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, how much of an influence would you expect, and how do you see ties moving forward?
Well, I would sort of echo what's been said already, that, it's important for Seoul to continue to cooperate with Japan. There's little to be gained, if anything, by adopting a confrontational approach. And there's every reason now for closer cooperation, precisely because the Trump administration has shown itself willing to bully and pressure its closest allies. I think, there will always be, very understandably, concerns over history. And they will flare up from time to time. And it's, I think, very important to recognize why, for the bulk of the Korean population, the persistent frustrations associated with Japan's unwillingness to address some of those issues in a way that feel genuine and based on significant contrition remain a source of great discontent. But nonetheless, I think the immediacy of the changes to the global environment require South Korea to work more closely with other partners. And when it comes to Japan, of course, the Ishiba administration is a minority administration. Prime Minister Ishiba is facing very real pressures at home. There is a lot of speculation whether he will remain in office for the foreseeable future. There is an important upper house election scheduled for July of this year. It's an open question of whether the LDP will be able to hang on to enough seats to maintain its majority in the upper house. If it doesn't, there is the possibility that Mr. Ishiba will be ousted by his parliamentary colleagues. There is even some speculation looking ahead to that election that Prime Minister Ishiba might be minded to hold a snap double election, an election for both the lower and the upper house simultaneously, in an effort to bolster turnout and thereby increase support for the LDP. That might also backfire. We might find ourselves with a different type of government in South Korea that might or might not be more cooperative with South Korea. So I think those are real issues. And when it comes to the United States, it's interesting to note that just a few weeks ago, the designated individual who would be appointed as the number 3 in the Defense Department, Elbridge Colby, was asked in his Senate testimony what counts as the most existentially important issues for the United States. And the only country he singled out was Japan. Why is that important? Because it effectively, implicitly leaves Korea and Taiwan outside the formal remit for American security guarantees. And that is creating a lot of anxiety, not only in Japan, but also in South Korea, about the reliability of US security guarantees. And we all know that there are pressures in South Korea to consider, for example, the nuclear option of South Korea acquiring its own independent nuclear capabilities. In an environment where America's reliability is being questioned, to reiterate what I was saying earlier, we need more cooperation, and countries like Japan are an essential part of that process.
Mm-hmm. Let's also touch upon North Korea before we conclude our discussion. On April 3rd, during the NATO foreign ministers meeting, the foreign ministers of South Korea, U.S., and Japan reaffirmed the goal of complete denuclearization of North Korea. But given the ongoing concerns that the role of cooperation may diminish, do you think South Korea should expand its leading role in responding to North Korea's nuclear issue, Professor Kim?
I think that South Korea should expand its leadership role, especially right now, because in many ways domestically, South Korea has been experiencing a lot of political turmoil. And so this would be a good opportunity for South Korea to really show that it is kind of taking a step forward and working with the global system in terms of providing more support, not just towards its allies, but also in terms of what it would do related to North Korea. When there are moments of instability, these moments can be exploited. And historically, North Korea has timed missile launches or aggressive rhetoric during these moments. And during a time like this, during leadership vacuums, there might not be a clear and unified response. Also, it can delay responses. So it's important now for South Korea to try to reopen, not just improve relations with the United States and Japan, as we've been talking about earlier, but also to try to reopen dialogue channels with North Korea, even if it's informal. South Korea should also try to continue to work more proactively with the international community and with regional and international forums like NATO and the UN and ASEAN, because it's going to be important for South Korea to focus on building coalitions right now and reaffirming extended deterrence. And in this way, if South Korea takes a step forward in terms of playing a leading role, this can also showcase that domestically, Korea is now seeing a bit more domestic political stability.
Right, so we would really have to become more proactive in terms of relations with other countries, including North Korea as well. I had a lot of questions more, but we are running out of time, so this would have to be, we would have to close our discussion right here. Many thanks to Professor Kim and Dr. Nielsen Wright for sharing your valuable insights this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.